Hello again. In this video clip, we're looking at clause 4.4 of ISO 27001, Information Security Management System. So looking at the criteria on the screen in front of us, just to read it out, it's the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an information security management system in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. Okay, so we've already looked at the video clip for the corresponding clause in ISO 9001, and we went into some detail there about the breadth of the management system, what needs to be included with regard to, for clause 4.3, the scope, and clause 4.4, the documented information required to support that scope. Well, really, when we're considering it, how it applies to 27001, really, the things that we have to kind of bring in on top of 9001. So firstly, for 9001, it would be all of the operational processes, the key things that you do. And for 27001, within those processes, we'll be handling data. And sometimes it'll be customer data. And in that kind of circumstance, we've got to think of ISO 27001, and by extension, of course, GDPR, just to make sure that we consider GDPR within the context of clause 4.4. And the document I'm looking at for additional criteria really is fairly generic at this stage, because the additional criteria for personal identifiable information to be considered at this clause, really, it just says more or less the same thing, but that you must consider personally identifiable information throughout the management system in its entirety. And what do we need to consider specifically then? Well, number one, if 9001 looked at all of the operational things and maybe the administrative things where we gather information, I think from a 27001 perspective, what we've got to think of is the systemization of the processing within the organization, how you process information through information platforms like your Google G Suite or your Office applications in Microsoft Word, like Sage or QuickBooks, also CRM packages. Salesforce in particular is fairly prominent. And all of these systems now need to be focused on with regard to what kind of controls do we need to put in place. Also, there may be ways that information is stored, which they're not part of any operational process, but there might be a storage system or a filing system in place. And all of these processes need to be included within the scope of the management system. But I guess the real, primary focus of an ISO auditor coming in to audit an organization to 27001, what they're looking for is that the system contains all the documented information to support each of the requirements of the clauses, clause 4 through to clause 10, with consideration for the criteria in this standard, 27001, and for those who are concerned about GDPR, for ISO 27701. So when you think about the requirements of clause 4 for documented evidence to support risk identification and opportunity identification, the needs and expectations of interested parties, which produces contractual arrangements and so on. Well, the scope of the management system will have decided which processes fall under ISO 27001's remit. And by extension, then the documented evidence to support that would be, well, how does the organization control contractual arrangements? Are they templated and so on? And likewise, systems. What systems, software applications are in use? And how does the organization manage its infrastructure? Does that need to be documented at this stage? Is it a policy-driven exercise? So there's a lot to think of. I guess while it's important to note that every organization takes it upon themselves, has their own autonomy with regard to deciding what documented evidence they need to support their management system, what documented information they need to provide instruction and guidance. Yes, it's within your own autonomy, but there are expectations there through the requirements of the standard. And I guess, what we've got to consider here is just where in your organization do you manipulate personally identifiable information? What policy, documented evidence needs to be controlled by the management system? How do you need then to provide for education and training to support clause 7 of the standard? Also then through clause 8, what information do you need to provide to the workforce for processing activities? Further on, when you get into clause 9 of the standard, you're taking up the life cycle approach, of course. How does that inform us at this stage? Well, clause 9 to do with internal auditing and management review. How are we going to make sure that the information security aspects are considered through those elements? Yes, it's for consideration in later video clips, but at this point, we need to make sure that our management system doesn't just say what we have to do in advance of doing it. It also provides for how are we going to carry out verifications and control checks after the fact and report into management review. So that has to be considered at this stage. If you need a little bit of guidance, contact us, click a chat box and ask a question and so on. Happy days. That's it for now. Another step towards certification. Thank you.